Next is Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I want to talk about the drone strike that has gotten the most recent attention, and rightly so. I'm talking about the strike on August the 29th in Kabul that killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, and the process leading up to that strike. Now, I understand that, I'm sure all of you are familiar with, everyone on the panel is familiar with the strike I'm talking about, aren't you? And you're familiar with the New York Times reporting as early as the day after, on August the 30th, that indicated that, in fact, it was innocent civilians who were killed, including the 7 children. The military denied this for some weeks, but it turns out now that the Times reporting was entirely correct. I want to try and get a sense of how it was we got to this position, how we could have a strike of this magnitude and the military deny it, DOD, the Biden administration, deny it for weeks, when it turns out these innocent civilians were killed. Let me just ask you, Mr. Sales, and you can tell me if you're not the right person to address this question to, but I understand that, you know, sometimes in the fog of war, mistakes are made. What interests me is that the spokesperson at DOD, John Kirby, admitted that there was a significant breakdown in process. Those are his words, breakdown in process, that led to this drone strike that killed these innocent civilians. And yet there's been no discipline or accountability whatsoever for anybody involved in the process. Is that typical? I mean, is it typical to have a breakdown in process of this magnitude and no remedial action be taken? Do you know?
Senator, I'm probably going to have to defer to the general on that one. General?
I do not know the details. A lot of that operation was classified. In these hearings, and in I'm not on the inside with classified information anymore in my current retired position. What I can tell you is that the people who were on the scope and looking at the events, I think actually did believe that this vehicle was about to cause greater harm, was laden with explosive, and was about to cause much greater harm that they were frantic to try to prevent. And the mistakes that were made I cannot characterize, but I think the situation was one that they thought there was a very extensive threat that was about to take place.
Now, that all makes sense to me, General. That makes perfect sense. Here's what's a little more puzzling. We've learned since that the intelligence community, the CIA, actually sent a warning to the military as the strike, before the strike happened, before the drone strike happened, an urgent warning. This is per public reporting, by the way, so forget what Congress may or may not have been briefed on at the classified level, but at public reporting, September the 18th from CNN, public reporting says the CIA sent an urgent warning before the missile hit the car, warning that civilians were in the car, not ISIS-K, civilians were in the car. That's in real time. So the IC is warning in real time, an urgent warning that the target was wrong. And as you say, General, mistakes happen. I understand that. You know, mistakes happen. Here's what I don't understand entirely. So the CIA and the IC is warning, you got it wrong. You're targeting civilians. They ended up killing civilians. And I also understand that once you've launched that missile, there's no place to dump it off because it was in Kabul. It's a heavily populated area. Where are you going to dump it off? Where are you going to divert it to? I mean, you can't divert it anywhere, right? So civilians are killed. However, the next day, after the IC warning, after the death of the civilians, the next day, General Frank McKenzie, commander of U.S. Central Command, goes out and says that the strike had dealt ISIS-K a crushing blow. The next day, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, says that it was a righteous strike. The next day, the President of the United States goes out and claims victory for this strike. Now, what's strange to me about this is already we know that the military had been warned they'd gotten it wrong, and yet the President of the United States, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all go out in public knowing this and go out and claim victory and say, actually, we got terrorists. Does that seem unusual to you?
I'm certainly not in a position, Senator, to gauge the reaction. I can tell you that notice in the press that a message went out. Where did the message come from? Who did it go to? How long did it take to get to the people who were actually responsible for the engagement? All of that stuff is fog of war stuff that requires a much more close investigation than certainly I know about.
Senator,
I could not agree more about the need for a close investigation, and I would just say that is exactly why this Congress ought to be holding meaningful oversight hearings into what happened. These folks ought to be testifying under oath in public as to what happened. Because I suspect, General, that if we put the commander, General McKenzie, under oath and asked him in a public setting about what he knew and when he knew it, and when those who made the decision to launch this drone strike, when they were informed, I suspect we're going to find they were informed at a very early date and knew at a very early time that they'd gotten the wrong targets. And yet, you have the commander, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the president of the United States out there claiming victory. That suggests to me that either there was a severe breakdown in process, and you're not informing the president before he goes out to claim victory that, in fact, you may well have killed innocent civilians, or else he did it knowing anyway. Either way, we've got a big, big problem here, and we need to get to the bottom of it. My time's expired, but you wanted to say something, and then I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Ms. Shamsi.
if I may,